Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Scares That Shaped Us, a podcast about horror writers and the stories that made them. I'm your host, Matthew Jackson, and we have got another banger for y'all this week. Keith Rosson is here. We're going to talk to Keith about his excellent new novel, Coffin Moon, and we're going to continue our recent spate of Stephen King discussions by talking about The Tommyknockers. It's a great conversation about an underappreciated Stephen King book, and I hope you stick around for that. But first, a couple of announcements from me. I will be at Fantastic Fest here in beautiful Austin, Texas, September 18th through September 25th. If you're listening to this the day it goes up, that means tomorrow. It is going to be a fun time. I'm going to screen a lot of cool movies, say hi to a lot of friends from out of town, hopefully make some new friends. I know friend of the show, Clay McLeod Chapman, is going to be there with his new movie, The Restoration at Grayson Manor. And our friend of the show, Max Booth, will be there hosting once again the Ghoulish Book Fair on Monday, September 22nd. So if you're in Austin and you want to buy some books from the good folks at Ghoulish, you should head over there. That's always a great time, and I hope y'all check that out. And if you are attending Fantastic Fest and you see me and you're a listener of the show, say hi. I will be around pretty much every day for some stretch of hours. I don't have my full schedule in front of me at the moment, but I will be there every day. I would love to meet some listeners if you're there. If not, maybe we'll see you next year. It's always a great festival. It's my favorite film festival to go to, not just because it's in my hometown. So yeah, Fantastic Fest. It's going to be a great time. I also want to take a moment here at the top of the show to recommend a horror film for y'all. I just screened a movie called Rabbit Trap. It is in theaters right now. It is written and directed by Bryn Chaney, produced by Elijah Wood and the folks at Spectre Vision. It's a piece of Welsh folk horror set in the mid 1970s about a married couple played by Dev Patel and Rosie McEwen, who are living out in a secluded cabin in the middle of the Welsh countryside, and they come across a fairy circle and weird stuff starts to happen. It is a beautifully shot film. Bryn Chaney did a fantastic job visualizing this whole thing. It's a nice slow burn piece of weird fiction with a couple of really memorable scares, beautiful visuals. Dev Patel is great in it. Rosie McEwen is great in it. Jade Crute is great as a third character that I don't want to tell you too much about at the top. But yeah, it is out now. If you see it in a theater near you, go buy a ticket because it's a lot of fun. And if you don't see it at a theater near you, look for it on digital. I'm sure it will arrive soon with the Halloween season approaching. So yeah, Rabbit Trap. Great movie. Check it out. That's enough of me rambling for now. Let's head over to our interview with the great Keith Rosson. Joining us this week on The Scares That Shaped Us is one of our favorites. I've been wanting to get him on the show for a while. He is the Shirley Jackson award-winning author of books like Folk Songs for Trauma Surgeons, Fever House, and The Devil by Name. His latest book is called Coffin Moon. It is available now. Keith Rosson, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me. I seriously appreciate it.
It's great to have you here. I've wanted to talk to you for a while. I was a huge fan of Fever House when it came out, and just immediately latched on to your sort of fiction sensibility. And then when I found out that you were doing a vampire novel with Coffin Moon, I was, hell yes, I have to
Right on.
know more immediately. And Coffin Moon, for me, I was telling somebody this online a few days ago while I was reading it. I said it's like if Elmore Leonard wrote Near Dark. But for you, I know by the time our listeners hear this, the book will be out. In case people haven't heard yet, can you give us a little teaser of what Coffin Moon is?
Yeah, it's essentially, I call it True Grit with vampires. It's essentially a Vietnam veteran and his kind of adoptive niece are hunting the vampire that destroyed their lives and slaughtered their loved ones. It's set in 1970s Portland. It's real gritty. It's kind of a continuation of that horror crime hybrid thing that I'm doing lately. And yeah, it ticks all the boxes of both crime and vampire fiction, I think, you know.
It really does. It absolutely the way that it begins. You have your main characters, Minor and Julia, who are Dwayne Minor, I should say. His first name
Yeah.
is not Minor, but you refer to him as Minor. Um, Going through what could be a classic, like almost Blue Ruin style revenge plot, and like you say, you compared it to True Grit. It's that. It's got that like bad man did something. I'm motivated. I want to go get the bad man. You're the adult who has to help me through this.
Right.
But then the vampire of it all creeps in, and um like you've written a lot of this crime horror hybrid now, and I'm wondering what pops up in your imagination first. Is it the crime element, or is it the speculative element?
Oh, it's different every time. Like for Fever House, the real genesis of it was the two main characters, like Hutch and Tim, these two leg breakers, almost the first like 20 pages until they find this like severed hand inside of a refrigerator is lifted from another novel that never went anywhere. Um, so it was very crime focused, and then it was just I had this image of a guy running with like a doctor's bag and a severed hand and some money inside. And so like I'm like, what? From there, I had to build a mythology around it, you know. And with Coffin Moon, it was very different in the sense of it was like I was very intentional of like I want to write a vampire novel, and so that's where that started. It was just like, okay, so who are the humans in this story? Because again, my whole thing as a writer is if I can convince you that these characters are passably real and are, you know, potentially believable, I can give you whatever dumbass plot I want. You're along for the ride if I can convince you of these characters, you know?
Yeah, I am fascinated by, like, I immediately latched on to Minor as a character because I just love, if you tell me in any story context that you have a bartender who's trying to quit drinking, I'm immediately in. I'm like, that guy's life is something that I want to. And as a recovering alcoholic myself, that stuff translating into horror fiction is always something that I'm interested in, and it all feels so lived in, even before we get off on this wild sort of hunt that the book
Yeah.
becomes. Just living with that little while when we get to live with these people before all hell breaks loose
Right, right. Yeah.
feels so wonderful and lived into me. Are you do you have barback experience? Is that something that you've
No, you know, that's I actually one of the fun things about doing books like this is you get to do research. And so I actually just like sat down at a bar with a buddy who was a bartender of mine. I'm sorry, a friend of mine who'd been a bartender, and just kind of ran through a series of questions, you know, and it's really just a matter of like knowing just enough to like bullshit your way through it, you know?
Yeah, I also have to ask, we've done vampire novels on this show before, and I love asking the question of how your particular vampire came to be. So who are your like vampire fiction inspirations, and how did you sort of go about deciding how your vampires were going to work?
Yeah, it was a joyous experience. I'd say my main three are obviously Salem's Lot, and then the other two are more contemporary, and it's Richard Lang's Rovers and Andy Davidson's In the Valley of the Sun.
Ah, yeah.
Those two just tremendous, tremendous vampire novels where I practically should give the guys royalties because I feel like I just ripped them off so blatantly, you know, because those books are so good. And my thing was just really disavowing and pushing back on the like sexy vampire idea or the idea that they would like have their shit together enough to like cultivate wealth and castles and all of this stuff because like there's no time. and they have such like profound limitations. It's like, yeah, they're immortal, but if you and I stay out past our bedtimes, we're tired the next day. We don't die. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? And it's predicated on this idea that like you have to be a fucking murderer to live. You have to kill people and eat, dine on their blood to live. And I don't think that that is something that a large part of the populace could do with ease. And so it's part of the reason why vampires in this novel are such a like kind of struggling and fractured um, society. Like there's no community there. It's kind of one for all because it's like the only people that can survive are like dirtbags, and sociopaths.
Yeah. I love the more I love all kinds of vampires, to be honest, but I love the sort of feral nature of the vampire that comes
Yeah,
across in something like Near Dark or From Dusk Till Dawn is another example of this idea that what is it what happens to you when your entire being is governed by an appetite. um
right.
and your vampire John Varley is such a wonderful example of that, and he's so kind of effortlessly scary, which is something that I think good crime writers are able to carry off very well. The idea of making someone scary and intimidating in just a few sentences, because you could go on for pages about like, here's how scary this guy is.
Right.
Here's his entire backstory, and I'll tell you every person he's killed, and that way he's really scary. Whereas this guy rolls up and he's just an impossibly big figure in this scene. Um, how did Varley as a character, like setting aside your take on vampires as a whole,
Yeah.
what were the sort of inspirations you drew from to make Varley? Because he's such a good villain.
It's a really good question, and it's almost like I always hate the writers when they're like the characters really told me what they needed, and it rings very like cutesy, but one of the things about writing a book and then having it come out, a year and a half later or whatever, is that so much of that organic uh, internal process is like you don't write down the minutia of it. You know what I mean? And so I'm
Yeah.
like, I'm not sure what the genesis for him came from. I know that when I turned in a first draft of this to my editor after I'd sold Fever House, and I wrote Coffin Moon in like 7 weeks.
Mm.
And it was just the fastest thing that I had ever written in my life. And I just kind of like farted it out, and it was not great. But there were things there, that worked. And ultimately we used like 10% of it, of that first draft in this new version. I had to go back and like cull so much of it. But one of the things was John Varley's his kind of origin story
Yeah.
of being, living in Seattle at kind of like the turn of the century, and just being a like bruiser, and that stuck. And to me, that was just like, he's so much of this book is about issues with like parenthood and fatherhood, and like his own father had disavowed him, and yeah, that was a big part of it.
So you mentioned that stripping all of this stuff down and building it back up after the book, uh, after the first draft of the book.
Yeah.
Was that a new thing for you? Is that how, do you often tend to discard huge chunks of drafts, or was that kind of a new process for you?
My editor, Caitlin McKenna at Random House, is so good. And it has been the process with she and I have done 4 books together now. The next one that's coming out next year is called Crone. And I've had to do it with every single book,
Hmm.
where it's like not that was definitely the most marked uh, cut, you know, but every single book it had to there's been like, okay, this isn't working, this is cut this, move, so, and it's like I've learned to trust her so implicitly because she just makes every book better. So yeah.
So I'm curious about this because this is a question that I always want to ask, and we've sort of organically stumbled into it. So I'm gonna ask you, and then maybe I'll ask other writers. But I think that for a lot of writers, myself included, uh, the philosophy that, as Haley Piper puts it, the only job of a first draft is to exist.
Hmm.
Um, Meaning that you can always go back and you can always rebuild and change and do whatever you want. But I think that for some of us, there's a wall that you hit, where you go through and you write this thing and it's however many thousand words, and then you look at it and you realize, oh, maybe 10% of this is going to go forward and the rest is discarded. Is that, and I know some writers who get really excited about that, and I know others who just are daunted by the notion of, I now have to retell this whole thing. How do you come at it? What have you learned from this process now of tearing down these novels and building them back up?
Yeah, I love Haley's take on it, and my take on it is the best gift I've ever given myself as a writer is the permission to write a shitty first draft
Mm.
and to not obsess over the first 50 pages or the first 10,000 words or whatever, but to just go through it from beginning to end. Because by the time I get to the end, I'm vastly more informed about everything, about the plot, the pacing, who these characters are, and that's going to make that second draft so much easier. So like I am not I don't shy away from that stuff. I love it. I love writing. There are times when I'm like have edited a book for the, eighth time with my editor, gone through like, so many passes that I'm like, "Oh God." But beyond that, I love the entire process and it's all about making the story stronger and just carving, the bad stuff out and just leaving the good there and building that skeleton.
So I think this is a good place to transition into the topic that you brought, because it is a book with the author himself has given it a sort of troubled history. um and it is one that apparently went through its own version of rewrite hell over time. We're going to talk about the Tommyknockers today, everybody. The 1987 novel by Stephen King. It's science fiction and horror merged into one, and it is probably best known now among modern horror fans as the book that he says is sort of the nadir of his work because of his drug abuse and alcohol abuse that he went through in the 80s. um I think that there are a lot of really good things in this book, and I think that we unfairly tend to put it in that sort of cubby away from everything else because King talks about it that way. So I'm curious, Keith, what was your first exposure to this book like, and why did you want to bring it as one of your sort of formative horror stories?
I mean, because it was a formative horror story, I read it when it came out in paperback, so that was probably in '88. And so that would make me 12.
Mm,
My mom had just gotten sober. And so a lot of the like violence and terror and stuff that I had lived with up until then had was dissipating, but there was still a lot of like underlying shit going on.
yeah,
And so to have a character like I think it's Jim Gardner,
yeah,
uh, the main character who's a very active alcoholic in the book, um, who eventually, I believe, towards the end of it, manages a sobriety. Um, it was very powerful for me, and it was like he is this hero character, and an anti-hero who's done all kinds of terrible shit, but changes and grows, and it was like that was uh like a father figure for me. You know what I mean?
yeah,
It was
yeah.
a guy who's like ultimately doing the right thing in spite of all of this uh damage that he had wrought. And so that and just the fucking sheer exuberant madness of talking about like a crazy, wild conglomerate of every idea you could possibly have. I loved it.
It is one of those books. I think it you can sort of compare it to it in the way that it was King sort of cracking his knuckles and going, all right, all of those uh
Yeah,
sci-fi horror movies I watched in the 50s as a kid, I'm
right.
going to pour those out now
Mhm.
into this novel. Um and of course, like famously, it didn't go as well as it because of various things, but it's so funny reading it now with that context because I read it for the first time. I was probably 17 or 18, and I'm sure that I bought. I remember the Tommyknockers as a child because it had one of the coolest covers,
Mhm.
which was just his name, the title, and then that eerie green light
Yeah,
glowing
that's
out of the cover.
that's the one version I had too.
And I was always like, "What is that? What's going to happen in this book?" And
Right.
it is such a fun, like crazy sci-fi horror thing where for those who don't know, we're gonna spoil everything about this book if we feel like it. So, it came out in
Yeah,
'87. You've had time, but
bedtime. Yeah.
it's about it starts with a woman named Bobby Anderson who is a Western novelist, which is fun. Living in Maine, and she goes out walking in the woods one day. Uh, Near her home and finds this metal object in the ground and starts to sort of
Dig it up.
dig it up, pull back the layers of soil, wondering what it is, thinks it's probably just some random hunk of whatever that was out there, and then notices randomly when she gets home that her dog looks younger. She has this very old dog named Peter, and she realizes like something's different about Peter, and she starts thinking about this thing. And over time, as excavations continue, it's sort of like Quatermass in the Pit, which I believe it's been compared to before. She discovers that it's an alien spacecraft and that it is emitting this kind of gaseous radiation that changes people and gives them tremendous new like intellectual faculties where they're able to invent stuff and invent these crazy machines that do all these cool things, but it doesn't actually further them. It gives them this capacity, but it doesn't actually further them in any sort of philosophical or emotional
Yeah,
way.
there's no spiritual growth or
Yes, yeah.
that. It's like a neat parlor trick in a way.
Yeah. And then there's, her Bobby's friend, Jim Gardner, Guard, who is a poet and one of her dear friends and a raging alcoholic when we meet him. He is sort of immune to some of this influence because he has a metal plate in his head
Right.
from an accident when he was younger. And so he starts going around and realizing that something is very wrong and that it's
As the influence grows to
yes,
spread beyond Bobby's area, like house, and into the town itself.
yes, yes. And he realizes like, well, if this keeps spreading, then it's gonna eventually, encompass so much that we will be left with all of these people with this unchecked intellectual power and capacity for violence, because that's the other thing. When some people are exposed to it, they get really weirdly violent, and Bobby is like slowly going insane.
Right.
And it is absolutely in On Writing, King talks about it as like this was the best metaphor for addiction and what addiction does to you that my tired, drug-addled mind could conjure. But it's actually a good metaphor.
Absolutely.
It's
Again, I mean, the book gets so much shit, and it's like, granted, I haven't read it in some time, but like, I don't read King for his like efficiency. You know what I mean?
mm-hmm.
I love his side sojourns, and when he just takes something and just that's what I want from his books.
This is interesting because that's another ding that this book often gets is that it's very funny to me that arguably the two most beloved King novels, The Stand and It, are the longest.
Yeah.
And yet, whenever we come across a book of his that that people generally don't like, it's usually the complaint is usually that it's too long.
Right.
Something like the Tommyknockers or like Insomnia, which is another really thick one. Um, People go, well, it's just too long. I remember being in a bookstore when I was maybe 17, because that to me that was the height of cool when I had my own car and could go places. I would go to Barnes and Noble and just hang out.
That's so
And
cool.
I was in there one day, and one of the staff was helping someone with new releases, and they didn't know what they wanted to read, and so she was trying to like go through all the stuff and hit the big names, and she said, well, we have this new Stephen King novel, and he went, I don't read Stephen King. That guy takes 400 pages to tell a 200-page story. And I remember like wanting to like go confront the guy
Right.
in my teenage Stephen King fandom and be like, you don't know what you're talking about.
The
But there
righteous purity of a 17-year-old.
absolutely, I was
Yeah,
convinced I had it all. I read one Faulkner novel and a bunch of Stephen King, and I thought I knew everything about literature, Keith.
totally.
I really did.
Yeah.
But it is interesting that you bring up the sort of side quests that happen in so many of his books, or just the way that he will start in the present and then go off on a sidetrack explaining this incident from this person's past, and you'll go for 20-25 pages, you're just reading about something that happened to this person when they were 12,
Yeah.
and then the next thing you know, you're back in the present day and you realize that you suddenly know everything about this person.
Yeah.
um
And
and
he
the
does
Tom
it so seamlessly. You know
He
what I mean?
does.
It's not awkward. It's like it's so fucking good.
It really is. And the Tommyknockers, I was not able to go back and reread the entire thing, but I went through and hit some of the key moments.
Yeah.
And drilling down into like what he's trying to say about, if we frame this specifically as uh, something written in the context of what he was going through, which he clearly wants us to because he's brought it up a bunch,
Mhm.
it very much reads like a person who understands that they have gone through some sort of neurological shift, which happens when you're an addict, and wants to articulate it in the best way they know how. And all of the like 70s paranoia of those early King novels comes into this, but it takes on new shades, especially as Bobby starts to change. And that's in there. And the idea that he could have been the guy to create all of these wonderful books while drunk, while high, like he said he doesn't remember writing Cujo and stuff like that. That you could create all that stuff and then not be able to reflect on it because of what's happening to you. There's something really profound about it, and at the same time, it is just like a fun sci-fi yarn,
Mhm.
which
Yeah.
I love. And like you mentioned, like reading this after your mom got sober, and I had, to be completely honest with you, forgotten about Guard's alcoholism. I did not remember that was part of the book, and then I went back to it, and I again, we've said it a couple of times now, but I'm like, man, that this dude does not get enough credit for what he was trying to do here.
Yeah, and I can't remember exactly the ending, but I remember like as Bobby is continuing to change, I think she like kind of keeps him drunk, like lets him stay, staying at the house obviously, but kind of just like plies him with as much alcohol as he wants. And there is a tremendous like emotional showdown between the two of them at the kitchen table,
Yeah,
kind of like the end of the book where she has significantly changed and started to like become, they through this radiation and this exposure, they start to become these kind of aliens with telepathy and all this stuff and like a shared kind of group think. And it's just a tremendous showdown among maybe the two kind of sides of his warring id, if you want to get like that.
yeah.
Uh, it's so fucking good, man.
It's really good, and it has that, it walks that wonderful line. Like when we talk about King writing about addiction, The Shining is the one that comes up the most.
Mhm.
And it's understandable because The Shining is a masterpiece, and it is him unpacking like his own fears about the monster he could become
Right.
within Jack Torrance. The Tommyknockers is so much more internal than that. It is so much more about like what have I become, and is there
Right.
a way back from this?
Right.
And was any of it worth it? Like it's just so there's so much depth there, and I don't know if there's a better novel there if he had written it sober, which
Of
is a weird thing to say, and I'm absolutely not recommending anyone write things while addicted to things. Like, go,
course.
please
Yeah.
please go, and you know I'm not saying that, but it's such a like I said, if you want to just read it as a fun piece of sci-fi horror, it is absolutely that. It is Quatermass in the Pit. It is Invasion of the Body Snatchers. It is that kind of paranoid sci-fi stuff. And at the same time, it is a view from the abyss of
Yeah.
a person who is just at the end of their rope. And it's weirdly brave in that way. And I don't think we talk enough about how raw and open-hearted he was being by putting all that stuff in this book.
Yeah.
And I mean, you mentioned your mom, and if you don't want to talk about this, we can go past it. But as someone who has written about addiction and addicts in your own work, how does that feel going back and touching those nerves through fiction? Is it something that you do deliberately, or is it just something that you, because it's been part of your life, that finds its way into narratives?
Yeah. I feel very comfortable writing about addicts and alcoholics. Through my own like struggles and being raised in the kind of face of that. It's what I know, and those kind of people are almost too easy for me to write in the sense that I can fall back on that as a main characteristic of somebody I'm writing about pretty easily. You
Yeah.
know, it's almost like a go-to. It's very comfortable, and I know the parameters of it and all, and how it manifests and all that. So at times I have to step away from that as a feature for a character, just because it's kind of too pat and I've done it too many times.
Yeah.
But not in Coffin Moon. I felt like that was like the right avenue to walk down.
I think so too. And I think it's something that's obviously been done before, but when you work an addiction narrative into a vampire story and you have a vampire who is essentially an addict,
Right.
in their own way. Like it's a sustenance thing, not a high thing. But in that same, there is a kinship there that I always find interesting. And it's also just like, I say this as someone who's been in a bunch of 12-step meetings. There is an element of the outsider in those of us who've been in that world, and if you're able to like make peace with that and explore that as an avenue for character and dramatic tension and things like that, it can be really fruitful and fertile. And you write about it with the steady hand of someone who knows. And I mean that in a very complimentary way, because I've definitely
Oh yeah,
read I've
totally.
definitely read novels where it's like I'm writing about an addict and I am going to be very, very, very serious about this forever. And I'm like,
Yeah.
most of us who've been there are able to sort of see it at some kind of remove, or at least with a sense of humor, and understand that
Yeah, that kind of dark comedy to it at times.
yes, yes. Which there's definitely that in the Tommyknockers as well, and which you mentioned when we first started talking about it. I would have loved to have read this at 12,
Hmm.
because it is just such an explosion of imagination.
Yeah, absolutely.
We
Just
can,
the sheer anecdotal stuff about the townspeople and their creations.
yeah,
I could read an entire book about that stuff, you
yeah.
know? It's just so good.
It is absolutely him throwing every sci-fi concept he can think of into it, and it has that sort of playground feel, which I suppose at the time that this was published, just about any King novel was going to be good enough to go to press because that was just it. Like if y'all weren't around when King was at that level, I mean, he's still at that level, but the man had his own book club. There was a book club just for Stephen King. I'm fascinated by the response to this book, and I'm fascinated by his response to this book because it makes me think about making amends and living with regrets and things like that, and how you sort of always look back at certain dark chapters and go, "Ooh, I wish I had that one as a do-over." And his one is a novel that we can read that is honestly a very, very fun thing to read. If you set
Right.
aside all of the darkness, it's just so crazy. Was this your first King or was it
No, not
pretty
at
well
all.
into it?
Not at
Okay.
all. I
So
had, yeah.
what's your like horror history? Where did it start for you?
I can't remember honestly. I mean, I just plowed through them so quickly, you know. But it was like, Firestarter and Cujo and Carrie and all of, kind of blowing through the early bibliography by like starting at like probably 10.
Yeah.
Uh, and then finding things like Dean Koontz's Watchers, like that book blew my mind, and then Swan Song by Robert McCammon, and it was like
Yeah.
that trifecta of like King, Watchers, and Swan Song. I was like, oh, I have arrived. Like this is it, man.
This is a sidetrack here, but I think it's a fun one because I cannot tell you the number of times since I started doing this podcast that no one's actually picked one for their story yet, but the number of times that I have talked to people about early Dean Koontz
Uh-huh.
as a formative horror thing, which it was for me too.
Yeah.
Like I wasn't allowed horror stuff as a kid, so it wasn't really until I had my own money and my own car and I could go
Hmm.
out and buy books and my dad couldn't really tell me no anymore that I
Yeah.
really got into horror. But like the Kuntz stuff was always right there next to the King stuff at the shell on the shelves and Watchers, like I had a friend tell me Watchers is Dean Koontz's best novel. I went,
Hmm.
"Oh, okay. I'll go get it." And they weren't lying at all. It is
Yeah, and it's
an
like
incredible book.
I may have read a few others of his previous to that, but like, I mean, the man has got to be on par with King as far as output that he's, released. And I think that's kind of the last one that I've read. Um,
It's such a fun book. And of course Swan Song is that gigantic post-apocalyptic playground that McCammon
right.
threw out there. Um so
And
you
talk about camp. There is some campy shit in that one.
oh god, yeah. There's a wrestler named Black Frankenstein, which is
And the dude with the nails for his hand, the wooden hand with nails in it, and yeah, just yeah,
that is Robert McCammon's Escape from New York. Basically,
yeah, right.
it's just a full on playground thing. Um, so have you just kind of been a horror fan your entire life? Like
Yeah,
how early do you remember being into this stuff?
I mean, like I said, like starting at 10, devouring all of King's stuff and the books that we mentioned, and then when I was in my 20s, and I had done like throughout my teen years, I had done like punk fanzines and doing a lot of like zine stuff and writing record reviews and interviewing bands and all of this. And in my early 20s, I'd always been a voracious reader. I really got into like literary fiction, particularly story collections
Yeah,
and dude story collections, like very kind of masculine, like guys like Daryl Spencer, who wrote Bring Your Legs With You and Caution Men in Trees. Like he wrote real like macho like short stories about like boxers and shit. And I just fell in love with that kind of stuff. But I also grew up on King and on G.I. Joe and X-Men. And so like I wanted to be a writer so bad, and I would try to write like literary dude fiction. and I just couldn't not put like a ninja robot in it or something. You know what I mean? So it's that
Yeah.
literary sensibility of character, but with fun, campy ideas.
Do you think now that you consume more like crime stories or more speculative horror stories?
Well, nowadays I'm mostly like, I'm fortunate enough to be asked to blurb stuff. And so I mostly just I read what I'm being asked to blurb.
Yeah.
So I don't get a lot of free reading time. So it's mostly horror stuff now, but then when I need like a palate cleanser, I'll read crime fiction. Um, and so like there's a new Scott Wolven story collection that came out, and he's a fantastic crime writer. Um, and so yeah, I'll do that to kind of like take a break a little bit, you know?
So, one of the great things about doing this show is I get to experience these stories sometimes for the first time, and sometimes I get to re-experience them. But whenever an author picks something and I know their work, and then I go back to whatever the topic is, I can go. I'm sitting there going like, okay, what is it in here that got to Keith that
Hmm.
ended up in the Keith Rosson fiction that I've read? And the thing that jumps out at me most is when I picked up Fever House, I picked it up because everyone was recommending it. I did not know anything about your work prior. I just everyone was saying this book Fever House, it's great. I picked it up and it is a book that reminds me of that sort of explosion of imagination that the Tommyknockers has.
Right.
It just because like you said like it's fascinating to me that that book started with just talking two
Hmm.
guys in a car talking like it starts with this very sort of pulp fiction-y kind of
Hmm. Right, right.
discussion between two guys they're not like master criminals, they're just doing a job,
Yeah,
and all of a sudden there's a severed hand that does weird shit to people, and then
right.
we start seeing the government reports, and we start seeing who else has come into contact with this and what has it
Hmm.
done to them, and then it just becomes this whole other thing.
Right.
um is the Tommyknockers a book that you have thought about a lot in those terms as being a touchstone for you, or is it just sort of a background radiation part of your life?
I don't think it's anything that cerebral, but I do think that like that, I mean, it sound like his King's bibliography is just a touchstone, and it's just so ingrained, and that kind of permissiveness and that like ease where like you said he can go on a 20-page run about a secondary character and then come back to advancing the plot, and it's like you didn't even notice because he's so good, and it's like that is the kind of thing I can't do that. You know what I mean? Like I think there are times where I get reasonably close to it, but that kind of like ease and permissiveness is something that like I really strive toward. But I do think it's kind of just like his shit is just so my own work is just so latticed in that, and it's just like a part of, you know, like you said, the background hum.
We've had a lot of Stephen King conversations on this show recently, which is funny because when we started this, I thought it's only a matter of time. It's going to be a few weeks, and then someone's going to bring up a Stephen King thing. And we went probably 6 7 months into this show without anybody bringing up a King story. And
Mhm.
now for the last like 3 months, we've had I don't know how many. Like I Wendy and Wagner was talking about Stephen
Mhm.
King with me. Clay McLeod Chapman. We had uh, Christopher Golden and Brian Keene on to talk about their big Stand anthology. I've got another writer who wants to talk about something in the Stand. And it, I was talking about this with Clay actually on his episode. That I think that we take so much of King's influence and impact for granted because it's been so long. And for most of us, like I was born in 1986, I've never lived in a world where
Right.
Stephen King was not Like he's like the queen. When the queen died, I was like, what do you mean the queen died? The queen
Yeah,
can't
right.
die. He's so monolithic, and I think that there's a segment of horror fandom that wants to sort of go, oh yeah, well we all know that. Like that's the monolith over there. We're not going to talk about the monolith. We're going to
Right.
talk about this, and this. But it's amazing that there's still so much to be taken from it. Not just that he's still writing and he's still writing great stuff, but that we are still mining this stuff and going back and going like, oh yeah, that the Tommyknockers sort of proved to me that you can kind of do
Yeah.
whatever you want.
Right. I think it's timeless, and I also think that there's value in appreciating people while they're around,
Yeah,
you know. And like I very much do, and I very much think that the dude is just such a his writing is just such a part of ingrained fabric of my reading life and my writing life. And like I just want to, you know, tip thine hat to the guy while he's around.
as a crime fiction guy, are you a fan of his crime fiction?
I haven't read a whole lot of it, which is kind of intentional because I'm like savoring his stuff. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And again,
I
I don't have a lot of reading time, and his books are like such a commitment. You know what
yeah.
I mean?
I have the hardcover of Billy Summers, which everyone has said is great. On a shelf. I bought it when it came out. It's on a shelf, and I think it's one of those King novels that I will just like because one, sad the sad thing is one day we'll run out.
Right.
So I'm like, one day I'll sit down with Billy Summers and cozy up to that and do that. I really like his merging of crime and horror in something like The Outsider. I think The Outsider
Mhm.
is fantastic.
Yeah.
um it's annoying to me that he can write crime fiction so well and supernatural horror so well.
Well, and literary fiction. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
yeah,
Because like New Yorker stories are like, yeah, man, he's one of those dudes, and gets written off as either a monolith or oh, he just writes horror, and it's
yeah.
like you're missing out.
You really are. Even this is the thing is like we're talking about the Tommyknockers, which is a book that so many of us, myself included, at times have sort of tucked away and gone like, well, that's minor King. We don't talk about it. But like when your minor stuff is this good, come on.
I know. Yeah, totally.
He's allowed to have some minor stuff if it's that good. But before we let you go, Keith, you mentioned your next novel, Crone, which is out. It's out next year. Yeah.
Yeah, it'll probably be about this time in 2026.
Is there anything that you can tell us about it?
Yeah, if I could do my 25 word pitch, an ex-detective and ex-addict is his daughter disappeared 13 years ago, and in the process of investigating her disappearance, he destroys his life and becomes indebted to a gang called the Crooked Wheel, where he's an enforcer for them. They actually appear in Fever House if you're paying
Yeah,
attention.
yeah. The Crooked Wheel
Uh,
is a recurring thing. Yes.
Yeah. And so he becomes indebted to them. And when the son of the boss is murdered, the boss comes to him and says, if you find out who killed my son, your debt is cleared. So he gets to use his detective skills, and it winds up entwining with his daughter's disappearance and something very strange that's lurking in the woods throughout all of this.
So am I correct in my thinking is in the implication of the title that this is sort of your witch novel?
Yeah, it's like a witch
Ah,
crime thing. Yep.
oh man, I can't wait. I love that. I love the index to the mob. Yeah, I'm excited about all that. And you mentioned the Crooked Wheel. Um, do you consider all of your books to be part of one universe, or do you just keep using certain motifs?
I don't know, man. I love throwing Easter eggs in. There's the Crooked Wheel. There's a fast food joint called Bean There, Bun that makes its appearance in almost every book, started in Smoke City. And then there is a sitcom, an as yet unnamed sitcom that first appeared in Road 7 about an anthropomorphic plate of lasagna. It's this TV show that's centered around this plate of lasagna that talks and is very horny and tries to bang all the people in the show. And that manages to come up in every book too. So I'm just laying these weird little fish hooks for people that
Yeah.
want, like treats.
Well, we didn't even talk about like that's a Stephen King thing too.
Yeah,
The just
totally.
it's
Those
all
are
it's
way
all part of
cooler.
one
Mine
thing.
are about horny lasagna, but yeah.
Sentient horny lasagna absolutely sounds like something Adult Swim would run right
Yeah,
now. So
totally.
you should go
Right.
talk to them. Um, so the book once again, everybody, is called Coffin Moon. I highly recommend picking it up. You are hearing this if you listen to it the day it comes out. You're hearing this on September 17th, which means that it is available now. So you should go get it. Keith, I know you've got stuff going on to promote Coffin Moon. Will you let the people know where they can find you online?
Yeah, I'm mostly on Instagram. I think it's Keith Rosson or Rosson Keith. I get them all mixed up, but you'll see my mug appearing at you if you do a search, and at Blue Sky. Those are the two places I'm mostly at.
All right, great. Our guest has been Keith Rosson. Keith, thank you so much. It was great having you on the show.
And an absolute blast, man. Thank you so much.
Thanks once again to Keith Rosson for being on the show. Coffin Moon is available now wherever books are sold. I highly recommend picking it up. I also recommend picking up the Fever House duology, Fever House and The Devil by Name. They're bangers. Keith is great. This was super fun getting to know him a little bit. Go find him on socials. Keep track of everything he's got going on. He's a fantastic member of the horror community. And if you want to keep track of everything that we have going on, the easiest way to do that is to follow us on Blue Sky. We are at scareshapedus.bsky.social over there. That is where you will find new guest announcements and giveaways and every episode of the podcast and all the other stuff that we do. You'll get updated on right over there. We also now have a newsletter. It is a hybrid newsletter between my horror writing and the scares that shaped us as a show. You can go to MatthewJacksonWrites.com. That's writes as in WRITES because I'm a writer. Get it? MatthewJacksonWrites.com. Sign up. It's free to sign up. There are also paid tiers where you can chip in a little bit of money to help me out, help the show out, because I do this show for free and the show is ad free. And I would like to keep it that way as long as possible. You can kick in as little as $1 a month. Basically, chuck something in the tip jar, help me keep the lights on, help me upgrade our gear and upgrade our guests and upgrade a whole bunch of other stuff because I'm going to do this podcast forever until they come drag me away from this microphone. I'm having a ball, and I hope you are too. Speaking of which, if you are having a ball, if you enjoy this show, please tell your friends. Let people know that you are having a good time with this little podcast we do. And if you have a moment to spare, head over to the podcasting app of your choice and give us a 5-star review. That helps us get featured. That helps us gain more listeners who might be interested in a show like this. And again, please give us 5 stars. I will quote the great Bomani Jones. You only give us 4 stars. I'm inclined to believe you are a hater. You can also find us on Facebook. We are the Scares That Shaped Us on Facebook. We are the Scares That Shaped Us on YouTube as well. If that is how you prefer to listen to your podcast, like, subscribe. We appreciate the support. We will be back next week with another brand new episode. Our guest will be Becky Spratford, the editor of an excellent new essay collection called Why I Love Horror, and one of the most important voices in horror fiction, horror lit criticism and discussions you can find right now. We are going to talk to Becky about another unconventional choice. We're going to do Where the Sidewalk Ends by Shel Silverstein with Becky, and you might not think that there are horror elements to be found in a Shel Silverstein poetry collection, but you would be wrong, and Becky and I get into it, and it's a lot of fun. That will drop September 24th at noon Central. Hope you all tune in. Until next time, take care of yourselves, take care of each other. I'm Matthew Jackson, and this is The Scares That Shaped Us.